before the roar of chariots echoed through ancient cities, before the clash of swords defined the fate of empires, and long before names like Alexander, Caesar, or Napoleon became synonymous with conquest, there was already war, primitive, brutal, and deeply rooted in the very sinews of human evolution. This is not merely the story of organized violence. This is the primal truth, that conflict is as ancient as humanity itself. War, contrary to what some modern narratives may suggest, is not a byproduct of civilization, but a constant thread running through the evolution of mankind. To understand this, we must journey back, far beyond the walls of Mesopotamian cities or the pyramids of Egypt, to a time when man first walked the earth not as a builder, but as a survivor. According to Lawrence Keeley, author of War Before Civilization, more than 95% of known societies have engaged in at least occasional warfare, and many fought constantly. Keeley's research dismantled the once popular myth that early humans were largely peaceful. In fact, archaeological evidence, fractured skulls, embedded spearheads, and fortification remnants paints a very different picture. Human beings, long before writing or even agriculture, knew violence intimately. They fought over territory, mates, resources, and survival itself. Let's begin roughly 500,000 years ago during the Lower Paleolithic. Our ancestors, Homo heidelbergensis, and later Neanderthals, were scattered across the continents. There was no such thing as organized armies, of course, but isolated groups would have come into contact, and when they did, cooperation wasn't always the outcome. Violence was likely a response to threat, territorial or personal. Tools designed for hunting quickly became tools for killing. Spears, clubs, and axes doubled as weapons of defense and assertion. One of the most haunting pieces of evidence comes from the Jebel Irhoud site in Morocco, where skulls from 300,000 years ago show signs of blunt force trauma. In another instance, at the Nataruk site in Kenya, dated around 10,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered the remains of 27 individuals, men, women, and children, who had been violently killed. Their bones displayed signs of projectile wounds and blunt trauma. According to the researchers behind the study, this may be one of the earliest clear examples of a group-in-group massacre. But why did these early humans fight? The answer may lie in the evolutionary pressures of the time. As anthropologist Richard Wrangham argues in Demonic Males, Apes and the Origins of Human Violence, our closest primate relatives, chimpanzees, also engage in planned, coordinated attacks on neighboring groups. These raids are not random but strategic, aiming to eliminate rivals and expand territory. Wrangham suggests that such behavior is not learned, but inherited, a dark legacy of our shared ancestry. In other words, the seed of war was planted deep within us, long before we ever laid stone upon stone. As we progress toward 100,000 BC to 10,000 BC, the Upper Paleolithic brought advancements in tool-making, social complexity, and symbolic culture, and with it, the capacity for more lethal violence. The invention of ranged weapons like the atlatl, a spear thrower that greatly increased striking distance, made ambushes and raids more deadly. Human groups, though still nomadic, began to develop identities, traditions, and group cohesion. And with group cohesion came the concept of the other. This division of us versus them is crucial. It laid the psychological groundwork for tribal conflict. The central flaw of human nature is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Even in prehistory, those Paleolithic emotions, fear, jealousy, loyalty, revenge, drove men to violence. Yet, violence wasn't always chaotic. There's mounting evidence that many prehistoric conflicts followed unwritten rules. Groups may have avoided fighting during certain seasons or used symbolic displays, such as war paint or body ornamentation, to intimidate rather than engage. But when battle did erupt, it was brutal. The Neolithic transition, around 10,000 BC, when agriculture began, only intensified this pattern. With the birth of farming came property, and with property came disputes. Land was no longer something you roamed across. It was something you owned, something worth defending or taking. The shift to sedentary life meant larger populations, food storage, and hierarchy. Societies began forming around control of resources. Now wars could be fought over grain, water, and cattle, not just survival. One of the most important discoveries in understanding prehistoric warfare comes from the fortified settlements of early Neolithic Europe. At sites like Schlitz in Austria, dated around 5200 BC, entire communities show signs of violent deaths. Mass graves contain bodies with broken limbs, crushed skulls, and arrow wounds. These weren't random killings. They were coordinated attacks on settlements, possibly as a form of conquest or extermination. By the Chalcolithic period, metallurgy brought a new dimension to conflict. The first copper weapons, daggers, axes, and maces, began appearing in archaeological contexts. Though still ceremonial in many cases, these weapons were status symbols, and later, tools of war. The famous C. the Iceman, dated around 3300 BC, was found with a copper axe, a dagger, and signs of a fatal arrow wound to the back. His death is considered one of the earliest known cases of murder, possibly even a small-scale battle. Before we continue deeper into this forgotten age of violence, consider subscribing to our channel. If you value historical truth over romanticized myths, if you're retired of modern narratives rewriting the past through wishful thinking, then this is the place for you. Subscribe and hit the bell, because in the next episodes, we'll explore how this primal violence evolved into the colossal war machines of ancient empires. But for now, let's finish our journey through the prehistoric battleground. As we near 3000 BC, the threshold of written history, the picture becomes clearer. Civilization was no escape from war. In fact, it institutionalized it. In Mesopotamia, the early Sumerians developed fortified city-states like Uruk and Lagash. Their rulers, or Lugal, were often both kings and war leaders. The Stele of Vultures, dated to around 2500 BC, depicts one of the earliest known organized military victories, that of Anatum of Lagash defeating Amma. Soldiers march in formation, wielding spears and shields. This wasn't just survival. This was organized, state-level warfare. Historian Ian Morris, in his book War, What Is It Good For?, argues that large-scale violence, paradoxically, helped create the conditions for peaceful, organized societies. While shocking, this perspective reveals an uncomfortable truth. War consolidated power, defined borders, and forged identities. It pushed humanity to innovate. In metallurgy, logistics, and governance. War, Morris writes, made the state, and the state made peace. But such peace came at a cost. The bones of the past, broken, burned, and buried, tell us that before war became political, it was deeply personal. It was about who controlled the valley, who guarded the river, who held the right to survive. Prehistoric art, like the rock paintings of Spain, Cueva del Roa, or the Libyan Tadradakakis, often depicts hunting scenes, but there are also images of archers in battle, suggesting that even before the alphabet, humanity sought to commemorate conflict. These were not isolated acts of violence, but generational patterns, passed down, ritualized, and remembered. We must not romanticize prehistory as a time of harmony, as some modern ideologies attempt. The noble, savage myth, popularized in Enlightenment thought and still echoed today, finds no footing in the archaeological record. Steven Pinker, in The Better Angels of Our Nature, writes, "The past was a horror show. It's far more violent than the present." His statistics, drawn from both historical records and prehistoric grave analysis, demonstrate that rates of death by violence were far higher in prehistoric times than in modern nation-states. By 3000 BC, war had become a social institution. The seeds sown in the Paleolithic had grown into full-fledged ideologies. Gods of war emerged, from Mesopotamian Ninurta to Egyptian Montu, and rulers began to legitimize their conquests through divine sanction. Violence, once a means of survival, was now a means of expansion and domination. But what does this all mean for us today? It means that the impulse for conflict isn't a glitch in civilization. It's part of the very operating system of humanity. We are not peaceful creatures corrupted by society, but complex beings shaped by both cooperation and competition. To ignore this is not wisdom, it is naivety. For a conservative audience, grounded in the value of historical truth and skeptical of utopian illusions, this history affirms something vital, that strength, vigilance, and the willingness to confront evil are not modern inventions. They are ancient virtues, born in fire, stone, and blood. And so, as we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, peering into a future uncertain and often unstable, let us not forget their story. From the first tribal skirmishes under the stars to the war cries that echoed across early city-states, conflict shaped us, tested us, and it taught us that peace is not the absence of war, but the triumph of order over chaos. This was only the beginning.